Those of you who don't speak often in front of crowds like this, like I only do it occasionally, you would know that when you get up here, you have these butterflies up here. In Xhosa, they say, "Dintaka," I've got birds in here. So, and my mouth is a bit dry, and I will warm up as I stand here. So if I'm a bit reliant on the water, it's not because of last night. It's really because of today. I'm always amazed at people when they are so at ease with a microphone and the stage up here. It's really something that I admire, and this I will never do for a living. All right, thank you for the introduction. In Basil's session, in breakaway session, when he spoke about moral intelligence, he explained an experiment that they did with a group where they had a control group and two different split-up groups, and they gave them tests and they set them up to actually purposefully let them cheat in the process. But in one particular group, same experiment, they just did one thing differently. They up the moral consciousness in that, in saying, do any of you know the 10 Commandments? Or do you know your company's moral code? And in that group, the cheating were either zilch or much less than in the other groups. So when she said here, he's a man of ethics, I really, this got into my mind. You know, when you do a presentation like this, there are always three: the one you prepared at home, the one you deliver here, and the one you prepare while you walk back to your seat. This time it's the one I'm preparing walking to this way. All right, let me start, and please, nothing here is original. A lot that I'm going to share with you is like telling you the Pope is a Catholic. Nothing in here is original except for the packaging of the information. If you need any references on this, which I didn't put on the slides, you can ask me afterwards. I will share the references or the sources with you. I want to do about 40% of the talking here and allow you to do 60% of the talking. You would have seen on your seats that you have different colors of papers. On the yellow pages, there's a specific scenario with a question, and the same would be with the blue and the pink and the green. And being in South Africa, I avoided black or white sheets in the process. All right, so what we will do with that is I'm going to give you a backdrop. And I've asked that they warn me around about at 30 minutes. Then I'll try and round off as quickly as can, and then ask that you assemble in little groups of green, pink, blue, and yellow. And read that little scenario and deal with that question. And then after about 10, 15 minutes, let the whole big yellow group, pink, blue, and green gather, share your learning, capture one or two, and come and share it with us back here in the process. Let me start with this first slide over here. This thing doesn't have a pointer, it's only a clicker. In the middle, good. I am from an organization called USB Executive Development. Easiest way to understand this, the University of Stellenbosch has got two business schools. The one is within the university as a department of the Faculty of Commerce, and the other one, USB Ed, is a business school standing outside of the university, and it is a public company, and in South African terms, it's also a BE Level 3 company. It makes us more flexible, no reporting lines, no academics meddling with your affairs. Because what you are actually driving out there is practice, and you're not trying to fit the ivory tower with wheels or tires. So it's giving us that independence, that flexibility to do what we think we can do best. That company, USB Ed, is filled with people with a deep passion for people and with a hunger for learning and development in Africa. That's why we have a very low staff turnover. Some I would wish would leave at some point, but they don't leave for some reason. They just stay with us. So we then rather invest in them so that they can become better employees in the process. In that organization, I have the role of CEO, which is Chief Executive Officer, but I'm also the Chief Cultural Agent in the organization because I have to take responsibility for the culture in that organization. And with my colleagues for the strategy, and for those that are reporting directly to me for their development, to see that we stay on track and that we stay true to the vision and the mission that we have in the organization. As a human being, I am connected with the human race, and I'll explain a bit more than that, but I am mostly connected with Africa. My forefathers apparently left this continent around about 55 to 100,000 years ago from the Rift Valley. And we returned here about 350 years ago. I lost a lot of my pigmentation in the process because we had to adapt in Europe with all the snow and stuff, otherwise the wolves would have eaten us. So now coming back, we're trying to get the pigmentation back, but it takes a long time for this revolution to happen in the process. I am also a philosopher, I think, practical philosopher, because I think philosophy is one of the things lacking in management and leadership development in these days. I think we have thousands and thousands of years of applied thinking and thought which we don't allow our managers and our leaders to tap into. We try and rethink those things that have been thought about many ages and millennia ago. So philosophy is the love for wisdom. So if at least I don't have wisdom, I at least have a love for wisdom. So you know philosophers say when a baby is born and that baby makes that cry, for other people it's just a cry, a physical cry. For philosophers, that baby is saying, "Here am I, where are you?" Because that baby wants to connect with the human race. Philosophers also say that if a tree falls in the forest and there's no one to hear it, does it still make a sound? Now, Sir Ken Robinson changes that. He says, if a man is alone in the forest and he says something and there's no woman to hear him, is he still wrong? So, okay. If you don't mind, I'm keeping these notes with me because of that third preparation for the meeting. I made some notes on this and I don't want to forget it. Let me just come back to this one here. This is the continent of Africa. It is a vast continent. And you do not realize this until I've shared the following information with you, and I'm going to go through it quickly. Into that continent, I fit the USA, China, India, Spain, France, Germany, Italy, Eastern Europe, the UK, Switzerland, Portugal, Belgium, Netherlands, Spain, New Zealand, Norway, Sweden, and I still have room to play in. And if you don't believe me, I'll send you the square kilometers afterwards. It is a vast continent. It's a continent of 53, 55 countries, depending which election you're following. It is a continent with immense diversity. We have a country like Nigeria, 160 million people, 250 clans in that country, each one of them their own language, so different that they don't even understand the other clans in one country. In South Africa, we've got 11. What we did is we upgraded them all and said they are official languages. But that's their espoused theory. Mostly we use a borrowed language from somewhere north, like we're doing today. Management development. I think business schools or forget the name business school, I'm using it in the absence of a better word. Entities that keep themselves busy with the development of leaders and managers. They have what my colleague Arnold calls convening power. They can bring people together in a space. But when they do that, there is a tremendous responsibility in what happens in that learning space when you bring them together. Because you have an opportunity to influence. And that opportunity in terms of our conversation for this conference and for today is what kind of value formation and how should you tackle that? Because that is what's your English word? That's no glib. Can I use that word? G-L-I-B? Is it glib? Okay. And it's extremely complex and should not be taken lightly. And I will try and show to you in a moment why that is a challenge for us, but also a tremendous opportunity as entities that work in this space. So here we are 2.3 million years later. Apparently it started with a big bang. To me it's hearsay, I wasn't there. Apparently it's like you take different parts of a computer, you put it in a plastic bag, you take it up 10 kilometers, you throw it, when it hits the beach, you have an iPad. It's something, apparently that's how the Big Bang operates in the process. Then at some point after 13.7 billion years ago, then about 2 million years ago, Habilis and Rudolphus sat, they looked at their knuckles, they couldn't stand the pain anymore, and they thought there must be a better way. And it took them about 2 million years or so to get to a better way. And they started getting off on their heels, on their back feet, and they started walking in the process. So they then evolved in what we call Homo sapiens, which means directly translated, the wise ape. And if you look at the world today, the word sapiens there is a bit ironic. But be that as it may, then Homo sapiens at some point about 300,000 years ago started evolving from making these guttural noises to something that sounded like language. They started to speak. And then they started leaving Africa around about 100,000 years ago, and they split into the rest. And here we are today, and we all share about 30,000 genes. The 6 billion of us share about 30,000 genes in the process. So, what have we then delivered in 2.3 million years? Well, if we reduce the world to a village of 100, in the split, you would find 60 of this village living in Asia somewhere, 11 in Europe, 15 in Africa, and 14 in the Americas. And we were busy in terms of that language ability that we created, because 12 of us in that village can now speak Chinese, 2 Russian, 2 Japanese, 3 Hindi, 3 Arabian, 5 English, 5 Spain, 3 Portuguese, and 65 other languages. So we've been really creative in terms of our language ability in the process. In this village of 150 would be more or less women, and 50 would be more or less men, male, female. Of those 100, about 26 we would regard as children, and the other 74 as adults, of which 8 is about above the age of 65 in our village. So in our village, we were also very busy culturally In our village, you would find about 33 Christians, 22 Muslims, 14 Hindus, and then the 12 at the bottom, they more or less subscribe to the Big Bang as well in the process as a source of origin. Then in this village of 187 would be have some form of literacy, of only which 7 will have a college degree in our village, and only 2 will have a computer. 22 will have a computer. 15 in the village will be undernourished, 1 will be dying of hunger, and 21 will be obese in our village. So there's very, very little sharing here in the process. 87 of the villages will have access to some form of clean water, at least water that won't kill them with the first sip. The others are not so lucky in the village. 77 of our 100 people in the village will have some form of a shelter. But don't be misled with that, because that 77, more than half of that are dwellings at best. But 23 would find a space somewhere under a bridge, a tree, or whatever. They don't have a place to sleep. Some of the 77 in South Africa are building homes of 20, 25 million rand, 35 million rand. Some presidents build homes of 45 million rand, while the others shelter under the bridge. And then, in this village of 100, 6 of them will control 59% of the wealth of that village. So 2.3 million years later, plus what we have heard this morning in more detail, there's a lot of good that happened, but it would look like we are starting to err on the wrong side of the spectrum, especially if we start using 1.3 times the resources we have on the planet. So much so that there's a cry for healing of the world, and we came up with this phenomenal plan of the Millennium Development Goals. Now, why isn't there the word value in any of these goals? Based on what we've heard yesterday, today, why is the word values not featuring in this? And I told you I'm a philosopher, I only have questions. I unfortunately have no answers. Do we assume values to be implicit in that? Are those manifestations of our values? When we deal with that little scenario on the papers, let's just consider that for a moment. But let me, like Google Earth, come a bit closer. Sorry, I missed this whole thing in front of me again. So, I'm from Africa. So if we come a bit closer to home, to Africa, this is how we fare in terms of tertiary education. You could see that we are rather anorexic. This is what happens in terms of science and research and investment into that. Now, if you think of progress and the value of science and research underpinning it, that's 2.3 million years later, that's the situation. Mercantile business exports. Wealth. You can easily see how the village of 100, where you would find those sheltering people and those undernourished people, you can easily see from these maps where they could be found. Because in one aspect, we are not doing too bad. We are really giving the other countries and continents a run for their money when it comes to poverty. And yet, this is a continent that sits with 60% of the world's arable land, 42% of the world's natural resources on this continent. And I have told you how big this continent is, in fact. Almost 1 billion people. So much diversity. As USBED, we move around in South Africa. We are in Namibia, Botswana, Nigeria, Ghana, Congo, Swaziland, Tanzania, Kenya, all those countries. When you meet these people of our continent, they are highly intelligent, highly creative, and they are the most beautiful people you would find on this planet. And yet you have this discrepancy. Why do you have this? Why is it that you sit with this? Why is a country like Nigeria producing the oil that it has? It has the refineries, but it's a net importer of petrol. And poverty is more than just not having money. It's not just a financial state. Poverty is linked to life expectancy, adult literacy, water quality, and children that are underweight. So poverty is not just about lack of money. And being poor in America is different than being poor in Kenya or in Rwanda. That I can promise you. Being poor in Sweden is different than being poor in South Africa. Especially when you consider these other elements that are surrounding this. So the task at hand is clear for Africa. We have to turn those resources into tangible results for our people. We sit with almost 64% of young people under the age of 24. I think it's 46% under the age of 15. We sit with the possibility of an enormous human dividend if we get our act together. Or we sit with a time bomb on this continent. Because the young people are getting fed up with the old guard who get elected, and the only thing that they are concerned about is to build themselves bigger houses, getting bigger bank accounts, and siphon the money in their direction, and don't care a fig about the people that elected them. The younger people are getting tired of that. They're getting tired, and that's why we all get cross with a guy like Malema. But Malema is somehow a plug into a noise that we don't hear. It's a plug into an area where we don't listen to the noise coming from there. He's actually just a, wat is 'n spreekbuis in Engels, Basil? He's just a mouthpiece of a generation that are really getting tired and very frustrated in the process. But we shouldn't do it for that reason only. We should do things because they are the right things to do for this continent. So, how? I would imagine, and here I am, like Maslow says, when you think you're a hammer, everything else looks like a nail. So, of course, I am in management development. And if I look at Africa as a system with thousands of variables, if I have my last dollar to bet, is that the best currency at the moment? If I have my last dollar to bet, I will choose the development of leaders and managers with that last dollar, because I think that variable has the biggest effect on the system as a whole. It's not a panacea, it's not a silver bullet, but because they sit in companies that shape this landscape of ours. They make decisions that has an influence on people in this continent. They can influence those very bad maps that we have seen. And in that sense, I think it's time for that. But where do you start with this? But I think it starts with that ethos. It starts with the character of those people. We need to develop on this continent a critical mass of leaders with a different ethos that we currently have. Or we at least have to bring them into a space where we can allow those people with that character to operate in a way that is to the benefit of all and not just to themselves. So spiral dynamics asks this question, and you will see that question on your paper as well. How should whom manage whom to do what when? So what would be the best practices and the methods if we want to create these new era managers, or we want to create a critical mass of it? We have those people on this continent. They are there. But it would seem at this stage that they are not in a state of critical mass. Or they are not in those positions where they are allowed to do what they need to do. Professor Graves said, and I want to come to this just to indicate the complexity of what we are up to, and in the context of this conversation. What I'm proposing is that the psychology of the mature human being is an unfolding, emergent, oscillating, spiraling process marked by progressive subordination of older, lower behavior systems to a newer, higher order of things. Now that is to show you that I'm coming from an academic environment. What he basically says is this: human beings, this is what happens, and it's more a function of how we think than about the reality out there, because it's a systems approach. But what he says is, because of our life conditions around us, human beings have this tendency to oscillate. It's almost like a dialectical process. You reflect inside and look at yourself. You look outside to your circumstances. And in this process, in this oscillating process, you don't complete a circle. You almost go like a spiral up and up in a dialectical process. And because of the conditions around you, you take certain decisions, and then value systems start moving, and each of those colors represent a certain value system. And I will maybe just quickly. So the first one, about 100,000 years ago, is the beige one. And you can see Professor Graves was a student of Maslow, and Don Beck was a student of Professor Graves, who is now pushing this and do the research and is making progress also in terms of spiral dynamics. But if you look at that, every time a circle, the spiral goes up, it doesn't reject the previous round. It absorbs it in the process. And that's why if we have this conversation and what we spoke about this morning, it is important for us in Africa to consider this. And in terms of where are we in Africa and in the different countries, where do we play on the spectrum? Because the kind of methodologies, back to Don Beck's question or spiral dynamics question, the kind of methodology and the kind of content that we present to leaders and managers on this continent depends on where they are. You have to meet people where they are. So we can, in this very select group sitting in this room, we can have conversations, and most of our conversations here could be around yellow, green, save the planet, have long conversations around consciousness, talk to each other, share our research and our studies on awareness, etc. But does that resonate here with the power gods? It has to at some stage, but how do we get them into that conversation? Can we just develop our material up here and go and plug and play where we are in certain context? So Richard Dawkins says content is subject to the context. So the context determines the content. If I came here today within your expectations and I started here and I took these flowers and I started rearranging them, and I told you about the colors and whatever. That content that I'm bringing is totally out of kilter with the context that we're having here. It will make no sense to anyone in here. And I know that's a very banal and very concrete example, but it's the same. If you carry information or certain management tools or management philosophies from a yellow or a green perspective into a blue or red environment, nothing resonates. But you need to do it. How do you do it? How do you do it? How do you get it to resonate there? That's our challenge.